All right, let us continue with our Chapter 10 review, and we're going to be looking at the chapter, and this is still Part 1. This is still Part 1. This will be 1B. The one I showed you, the one I've already done up through policies favoring big business, was Part 1A, and this will be Part 1B. So let us begin. We're going to take a look at the Harding administration at this moment, then we'll go through the Coolidge and the Hoover administrations, which will take us up to the end of this first section of the chapter. Warren Harding was elected president by a landslide in 1920. Keep in mind, he was the Republican candidate. He followed the Democrat, Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson, of course, was elected in 1912 and then 1916. He was the president. Woodrow Wilson was during World War I. And Harding ran under a policy or a slogan, a return to normalcy. Okay? He was a former Ohio newspaperman and at one time a U.S. senator. His return to normalcy captured the Americans' attention by, as it states here, he was attempting to follow a less ambitious foreign policy. Again, World War I had been extremely ambitious, and a lot of people were tired of the war, even though we were relatively untouched by the war. In fact, we were untouched completely, with the exception of American lives that were lost or harmed, or loss of revenue because of munitions and other goods that we were shipping to our Allied friends were destroyed by German U-boats. But other than that, the American soil was not touched. There were no battles on American soil. And his return to normalcy was a reference to going back to the way things were before the war, going back to the non-war economy, turning away from the total war concept that had been put in place under Woodrow Wilson. And so Harding, emphasized a less ambitious foreign policy and a greater emphasis on peacetime production. He wanted to improve our economy and bring about more prosperity at home. Under Harding, the United States refused to join the League of Nations because, again, the treaty was never passed, never ratified by the Senate. He did enact high tariffs, lower taxes, and restricted immigration. So again, let's take a kind of a look at what happened while he was president. We refused to join. We did not join the League of Nations. We did pass high tariffs, and of course those are taxes on imported goods. So we're taxing goods coming into our nation. He lowered taxes that we pay, and he restricted immigration. These are things that most Americans liked and most Americans favored. Let us go to our next slide. For a period when racial and ethnic prejudices, I'm sorry, I thought I had gotten out of that. There we go. Racial and ethnic prejudices were on the rise. I mean, we're looking at a period of time, the 1920s, late teens, early 1920s. Racial and ethnic prejudices were on the rise. We've already talked about this and how and why this occurred. Social Darwinism, the rise of the Klan, the Red Scare, all these things were happening. President Harding himself showed a remarkable degree of tolerance. Keep in mind, he is from Ohio. He is a Republican. The North was a little bit more advanced when it looked at race. The South, of course, was still quite racist. It was still segregated. The Plessy decision had come about in the 1890s, and so in 1920, when Harding was elected, we were only about 26 years into the Plessy decision. It will not be until another couple of decades, 1950s, when Plessy is overturned. And Plessy, of course, once again is separate but equal, legalized segregation. And this was predominantly found throughout the South because at this time in 1920, 1921, when he was inaugurated, the majority of blacks were still found in the South. But we do see toward the end of the 19-teens and the 1920s, the Great Migration, more and more blacks moving from the south to the north. So those numbers do start to shift, but again, it's a little bit of a slow shift. Anyway, getting back to Harding, he gave a speech in Alabama in 1921. Alabama is part of the Old South. I mean, this is Jim Crow. This is segregation. Lynching is a way of life in many cases down there. Harding, urged in Alabama in 1921 greater rights for African Americans and supported an anti-lynching bill. So here you have this Yankee, this Northerner, going to Alabama in 1921, asking for, demanding better rights, greater rights for African Americans, and he supported an anti-lynching bill. Harding also resisted anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism, of course, is prejudice against Jews. His campaign manager was a Jewish American from Texas. Yay, Texas! A man by the name of Albert Lasker, also known as the father of modern advertising. And we're starting to see, in the period of time we're at, in the late 19-teens, early 1920s, advertising evolve, grow. We're starting to see the radio becoming more and more widespread. We will be seeing widespread usage of motion pictures for entertainment and for advertising. So, Lasker, known as the father of modern advertising, Harding signed an act, signed a bill into law creating healthcare centers, child healthcare centers. Again, this is something that really was not heard of at that time. He also pursued arms reduction, the reduction of weapons, by sponsoring the Washington Naval Conference, which I believe was one of our vocabulary terms, and supporting the United States membership in the World Court. Now again, whether these are good things or bad things today is not really relevant, but the World Court and the Washington Naval Conference at that time were groundbreaking decisions. The fact that the World Court has not necessarily evolved the way that benefits America or many democracies is not relevant, but it was groundbreaking at that time. However, one of Harding's most serious weaknesses, and we all have them, was that he appointed a boatload, he appointed personal friends, which was often referred to as the Ohio Gang. These are people from his home state of Ohio, people he had known for a number of years, some of which were old buddies of his. Unfortunately, the Ohio Gang turned out to be rather dishonest. The Ohio Gang, dishonest. Harding, not so much. He was not a bad guy, really wasn't a dishonest person, but unfortunately, he did surround himself with some people who were. For example, one cabinet member, the Secretary of the Interior, leased oil-rich government lands. These are lands that the government owns. Keep in mind, the government is the largest landowner in America. At one time, pretty much everything west of the Mississippi was owned by the government, or at least a good chunk of it, 90-ish%. Anyway, this oil-rich land, which had been leased by the Secretary of the Interior, his job, keep in mind again, this is still all men, his job as Secretary of the Interior was to watch over this land that the government owned, to make sure that it was used properly. If at all, then you lease it out to different private entities to cut timber down, to drill for oil, whatever the case may be. I mean, that's why it was there to be used. But the cabinet official, the Secretary of the Interior, leased oil-rich lands known as the Teapot Dome in Wyoming to two business friends in exchange for, and here's the good part, exchange for personal bribes. So here we have the Secretary of the Interior, the Secretary of the Interior, who is leasing land, which again was not illegal. The government did this often. They would lease land to private entities to cut down trees, to mine coal, whatever the case may be. But the land was leased in exchange, and this is the key word, exchange for personal bribes. The Teapot Dome scandal uncovered just after, it was uncovered just after Harding's death in 1923, was one of the worst scandals in U.S. history. Okay, so pretty simple. Harding, had some friends who he appointed to key positions within his administration. Some of them were not very nice. Some of them were quite crooked. One of them, the Secretary of the Interior, exchanged land, the usage of government-owned land, for a bribe. And this is one of the worst scandals in U.S. history. Let's move on to the next one. Although the scandals emerged, they did emerge, of course, in other departments. They always emerge. Additional scandals emerged in these other departments, whether it be the Secretary of Education, whatever cabinet official it was. These scandals, again, were found primarily after Harding's death. Getting back to this, another of Harding's appointments, a man by the name of Charles Forbes, stole millions from the construction of hospitals for returning war veterans. So Harding appointed Charles Forbes. Forbes was in charge of this, and the construction of hospitals for returning vets was in place, and he stole millions of dollars from the construction of those hospitals. Because of Harding's poor choices, and again, this cannot be overemphasized, he wasn't a bad man. Harding was not a bad man, but he had a lot of bad friends. He chose these people for cabinet positions. Again, they're in charge of a lot of money. They had a lot of power that they could then sell, a lot of power and influence they could sell for their own personal gain. These scandals, the Teapot Dome scandal, the scandal involving millions of dollars being stolen from hospitals being built for veterans. These scandals left a long-lasting stain upon his reputation. Okay, the Coolidge administration. And there were the years he was president. He was president, let's go back. He was the vice president under Harding, and when Harding died in office rather suddenly, he becomes president in 1923. He then runs for his own term in 1924, wins it, but chooses not to run again in 1928. And so, from the time he took over, the time of Harding's death, to the time until Herbert Hoover is inaugurated, he is president. The one-time governor of Massachusetts, Coolidge, had come to national attention during the Boston police strike of 1919. He was mentioned one of the vocabulary terms that there were a number of strikes that had taken place in America in the late teens and the early 20s, and this was the reason why A. Palmer Mitchell, the Attorney General of the United States at that time, created the FBI and put in place J. Edgar Hoover in charge of the FBI to deal with some of these strikes and some of this instability around the country, because it was believed that a lot of these strikes were triggered by radicals, socialists, anarchists, communists. Anyway, in a telegram to Samuel Gompers, who was the president of the American Federation of Labor, Calvin Coolidge wrote, "There is no right to strike against the public safety by anyone, anywhere, anytime." So Calvin Coolidge, President of the United States, writes to Samuel Gompers, who was the president of the AFL, stating there is no right to strike against the public safety by anyone, anywhere, at any time. Okay, let me go back there. I think that I stated when he was president, he wrote that letter. I apologize. When he was governor, he wrote that letter to Samuel Gompers. If I said president, I apologize. I got that wrong. But I'm 14 minutes into the video. I'm not going to go back and erase it all and start all over. So he was governor of Massachusetts when this took place. This brought him to national attention. There we go. Based on his record as governor, okay, Coolidge was elected as Harding's VP when he ran in 1920. Again, he becomes president when Harding suddenly dies in 1923. And then, as I said, he was elected for his own term in 1924. He, like Harding, favored a laissez-faire, government's hands-off economic policy, which we'll get to. Coolidge symbolized the old-fashioned values, and old-fashioned is probably the key word there, old-fashioned values of honesty and thrift. Thrift essentially means, I guess you could use the word cheap, but not spending money wastefully. Continuing Harding's pro-business policies, his motto was the motto of Calvin Coolidge. Okay, the motto of Calvin Coolidge was the business of America is business. So Coolidge liked to say the business of America is business, and this is part of that pro-business Republican stance in terms of the economy. Laissez-faire, hands-off, as long as the economy is doing pretty well. People are working and businesses are not killing too many people through inferior products, that kind of stuff. Then the government was going to stay out of business way. Coolidge spoke so infrequently in public, he became known as Silent Cal. Again, Coolidge, who really wasn't very outspoken, he spoke infrequently. He just did not make a lot of public appearances, did not give a lot of public speeches. Now, of course, today, pretty much every word the president says is recorded for analysis, but the point is, he was not into that. He did not give a lot of interviews, and of course, radio was his very beginning. TV is still 30-plus years away. So again, silent cow. He received much of the credit. He received much of the credit for the business expansion of the 1920s. He had a talent for doing nothing. Talent I'm sure many of us share. A journalist once said of Coolidge, his inactivity suits the needs of the country admirably. It suits all the business interests which want to be left alone. And its units, those who are convinced the government has become dangerously complicated and top-heavy. So, his inactivity suits the needs of the country. It suits all the business interests which want to be left alone. And its units, those who are convinced that government has become dangerously complicated and top-heavy. In this case, its units refer back to business. So, in this case, those units refer back to business interests. So what he's basically saying is that Coolidge doesn't really do a whole lot of anything, particularly when it comes to business, and he sort of lets it be what it is. And this is good for America at this time, particularly for those who believe that the government has become complicated and top-heavy. However, there's always a however, there's always a but. Some have accused Coolidge and his laissez-faire approach to the economy as encouraging the over-speculation that led to the crash of 1929, which we're going to get to a little bit later on. So there are those who believe that it was Coolidge's hands-off approach that encouraged over-speculation. I believe we've already talked about this a little bit. And it was an over-speculation that led to the crash in 1929, which is true that it did. Whether this can be blamed on Coolidge, no. There are a number of factors that led to it. His administration, his policies were part of it, but he's not fully to blame. Everyone is to blame. Everyone who wanted to make a quick buck by buying stocks low, selling them high, nothing wrong with that. But everyone who participated in that over-speculation, they are responsible as well. Okay. Herbert Hoover, the son of a Quaker blacksmith. Hoover was a skilled engineer and a self-made millionaire. Before 1917, he had distributed relief aid to Belgian children. Of course, Belgium was a country that had been invaded by Germany as Germany was making its way into France. And we saw the poster, we saw the German soldier dragging the little girl away. In the background, Belgium was burning. He helped provide relief, distribute relief to those children who had been displaced by the war. During the war, and of course this war refers to World War I, during World War I, he was in charge of U.S. food production. So he was a part of the Woodrow Wilson administration. And so Wilson went outside of the party, the Democrat Party, and turned to a Republican to help him. Later, he was Secretary of Commerce under President Coolidge. So he served under President Woodrow Wilson's and he also served within the Coolidge administration. In the 1928 presidential campaign, Hoover, again, we're talking a little bit about his background, optimistically predicted the end of poverty in America. Poverty will end in America if I am elected. Now, again, you got to keep in mind, in 1928, the economy was, by and large, going pretty smoothly. There were some indicators, there were some signs talking about or indicated there were some issues, particularly with the stock market. The farmers had some problems, and they had some problems throughout most of the decade. But by and large, most Americans were working. Most Americans are making more money than ever before. And so, good times were here. And it was believed by these statements, we're going to end poverty. You elect me, and we're all going to be rich. It's those kind of things that, let's face it, most people believed. And so he won. He said, we in America today are nearer the final triumph over poverty than ever before in the history of any land. So he's basically saying, we're going to triumph over poverty. We're going to end poverty. We're going to do away with it. And we're closer to that than ever before. Pretty optimistic talk. Okay, let's go back to rugged individualism. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, partially because I'm a little over 20 minutes, and partially because we have already covered it to some extent in vocabulary terms. But I'm going to take a few moments to hit on a couple things. Hoover was very much impressed by the achievements of business in raising the standard of living here in America. He believed that this had come about because of a system in which individuals, again, here's the key word, individuals, were given equal opportunities. Individuals were given equal opportunities, they were given a free education, and they had a will to succeed. Now again, Hoover believed that America's standard of living was extremely high because of the system which we created, the system which individuals were given equal opportunity, that square deal. Now, we've talked about Teddy Roosevelt's phrase, square deal. So people are given a square deal, equal opportunities. They have a free education, and by this time we had started the public education school system throughout the country. Not everywhere, but we were getting that way. And a will to succeed. He believed this rugged individualism, which is what Hoover called it, that's the phrase he used, rugged individualism, it would spur progress. It was the foundation of America's unparalleled greatness. So what makes America great? Hoover believed that rugged individualism created progress, which led to unparalleled greatness, America's unparalleled greatness. Pretty optimistic. I'm not sure if people still feel that way today. It's a question for another day. Hoover felt too much government. Now again, what's too much government? What is too much? Is that too much yellow? Well, it's possible. Is that too much yellow? Yeah, because you can't really see too much. So again, it's possible there was too much government. Let me erase that so we can go back to this. Too much government. Too much government interference in business would undermine, hurt the nation's prosperity by increasing corruption. Now again, keep in mind, President Harding, a good guy, but chose his friends poorly. His administration was racked by corruption. And so Hoover felt that too much government interference in business would undermine the nation's prosperity and increase corruption, smother initiative, extinguish opportunity, and dry up the spirit of liberty and progress. Hoover believed too much government interference would undermine our prosperity. It would increase corruption, smother initiative. People would not take steps on their own to do things. It would extinguish opportunity, do away with opportunities. And again, what do we need? We need equal opportunities, according to the square deal concept. And it would dry up the spirit of American liberty and progress. This is all good stuff. That is what Herbert Hoover, felt would hurt America. Too much government would do those things. Okay, we're going to stop it now. When we come back, we will begin to look at, wrong one. Let's make it this one. Make it that one. There we go. Chapter 10, but this will be part 2. We have just finished part 1B. Part 1A is done. Just finished part 1B. And we're going to get back to this one. I'll come back and begin this one a little bit later on. Okay, we're done with this one. We are out. Bye.